Download this code from codegive.com, link in the description below. Tailwind CSS Grid Template Rows Tutorial. Tailwind CSS Utility First CSS Framework, Responsive Designs. Grid Template Rows, CSS Grid Layout. Grid Template Rows. Grid Template Rows. Tailwind CSS Utility. Tailwind CSS Grid Template Rows. Tailwind CSS. Tailwind CSS. Bash. npm install dtailwindcs. npx tailwindcs init. Grid layout. Basic structure. HTML. Doctype HTML. HTML lang equals bn. Head. Meta charset equals UTF-8. Meta name equals viewport content equals width equals device width, initial scale equals 1.0. Link ref equals https://cdn.jsdeliver.net/npm/tailwindcs at 2.2.19/dist/tailwind.mincss rel equals style sheet. Title grid template rows example /title /head. Body class equals bg gray 200p10. div class equals grid rows 3 gap 4. div class equals bg red 500h20 row 1/div. div class equals bg green 500h40 row 2/div. div class equals bg blue 500h20 row 3/div. /div. /body. /html. 1 grid. 2 grid rows 3. 3 gap 4, rem, x.rem. 4 h20, h40. Grid template rows. HTML. div class equals grid rows -100px 200px 300px gap 4. div class equals bg red 500 row 1/div. div class equals bg green 500 row 2/div. div class equals bg blue 500 row 3/div. /div. Grid rows -100px 200px 300px 100px 200px 300px. Tailwind CSS Responsive Grid Template Rows. Tailwind CSS Responsive Design. HTML. div class equals grid rows 2 md grid rows 3 gap 4. div class equals bg red 500h20 row 1/div. div class equals bg green 500h40 row 2/div. div class equals bg blue 500h20 row 3/div. /div. md grid rows 3. Tailwind CSS Grid Template Rows. Happy coding. Tailwind CSS Grid Template Rows. Grid Layout CSS Grid Layout. Grid Template Rows. Grid Template Rows CSS, Property, Row. Tailwind CSS, Grid Rows -value. Tailwind CSS Grid Template Rows. Tailwind CSS. Tailwind CSS. CDN npm. CDN *. HTML. Link ref equals https://cdn.jsdeliver.net/npm/tailwindcs at 2.2.19/dist/tailwind.mincss rel equals style sheet. HTML. HTML Grid Template Rows. HTML. Doctype HTML. HTML lang equals bn. Head. Meta charset equals UTF-8. Meta name equals viewport content equals width equals device width, initial scale equals 1.0. Link ref equals https://cdn.jsdeliver.net/npm/tailwindcs at 2.2.19/dist/tailwind.mincss rel equals style sheet. Title grid template rows example /title /head body class equals bg gray 100 div class equals grid rows 3 gap 4 p4 div class equals row span 1 bg blue 500 p6 text white row 1 /div div class equals row span 2 bg green 500 p6 text white row 2 span 2 /div div class equals row span 1 bg red 500 p6 text white row 3 /div /body /html grid rows 3 gap 4.0 rem 16 px row span 1 row span 2 tailwind css grid rows 4 grid rows dash value grid rows dash 100 px tailwind css grid template rows tailwind css